Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start with the Middle East. Turkey says 5 of its soldiers have been killed in an attack by Syrian government forces on an observation post in Idlib. The defense ministry said 5 other soldiers were wounded in the assault in Teftanes area. Ankara has already sent reinforcements to Idlib where the attack occurred. Last week, 7 Turkish soldiers and 1 civilian were killed in shelling by Syrian forces. Meanwhile, 5 civilians have been killed as Russian airstrikes pounded Idlib. The UN says violence in the border town has displaced 700,000 people since December. In Iraq, security forces have killed another anti-government protester in the southern city of Nasiriyah. Protesters were trying to block entrance to a university campus when security forces opened fire. Last week, the Interior Ministry ordered to increase security at schools, universities, and public offices amid violence. According to the Human Rights Commission, over 540 Iraqis have been killed since the protests began in October last year. They are demanding an overhaul of the country's political elite. Iraq says the U.S. has agreed to extend sanctions waiver for Baghdad to import Iranian energy supplies, including gas. An Iraqi official said the extension will last for a period of 120 days. The current waiver, granted in October, is set to expire on Thursday. Washington has repeatedly extended Baghdad's exemption to use Iranian energy supplies, which are crucial for Iraq's energy grid. The official said steps are being taken to make the country less dependent on Iran. Iraq is OPEC's second largest oil-producing country. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says U.S. sanctions against Tehran are inhumane. Speaking in Tehran, Rouhani said Washington wants Iran to surrender, but it won't succeed in its efforts. Rouhani said General Qasem Soleimani could have killed American troops in Iraq, but he did not. Tensions between Washington and Tehran are high after a U.S. airstrike killed Soleimani in Baghdad last month. Moving on, Prime Minister Imran Khan has held a meeting with British High Commissioner Christiane Turner to discuss matters of mutual interest between the two countries. In a statement, the British High Commission said a wide range of shared concerns were discussed. It said, besides bilateral ties, economic affairs and regional issues were also discussed during the meeting. Turner said there are many opportunities for the UK-Pakistan relationship to become even stronger. The High Commissioner said both sides have the potential to expand bilateral trade and investment. Pakistan Army says unprovoked Indian firing has wounded 10 civilians, including 2 children and 2 women, in Jandrot and Nikiel sectors along the line of control. In a statement, the military's media wing said the Pakistan Army responded effectively to Indian aggression, killing 1 soldier and wounding 3. It said the Indian troops deliberately targeted civilians with artillery and mortar fire. The Foreign Office has summoned India's Charge d'Affaires to register protest over ceasefire violations along the LOC. Hundreds of Pakistanis and Kashmiris took the streets in Vienna and Athens against the Indian clampdown of occupied Kashmir. New Delhi has shut down the valley after revoking its special status on August 5th, sparking a humanitarian crisis. In Vienna, participants assembled near the Austrian parliament and marched towards the Indian embassy. Meanwhile, in Athens, protesters staged a massive demonstration outside the Indian embassy, chanting anti-India slogans. The protesters expressed solidarity with Kashmiris and asked the global community to help end Indian atrocities in the valley. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party is facing defeat in New Delhi polls due to the citizenship law. Speaking in Karachi, Qureshi cited Indian government atrocities in occupied Kashmir as another reason behind the poor performance of BJP. Qureshi went on to say that India's economic growth has halved since the BJP came back into power. He warned that India may try to stage a Pulwama-like false flag operation to divert its people's attention from its economic situation. Fresh protests against the controversial Citizenship Act have broken out in the Indian capital of New Delhi. The Indian government has been facing countrywide protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act since December 12th. A large number of students and activists held a protest at Jamia Millia Islam University in Delhi and are now marching towards the parliament. In an effort to curb the demonstration, Delhi police stopped, manhandled and baton-charged the students. Meanwhile, similar protests are being held in Mumbai, Kolkata, Maharashtra and Lucknow. Meanwhile, Indian Supreme Court has refused to remove protesters from capital New Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, rejecting a plea by BJP. Filed by Nand Kishore, the petition pleaded that the protest is causing agitation and disturbance for citizens. In its verdict, the court issued a notice to the Indian government and Delhi police seeking a reply. The court said there cannot be indefinite protests in a public area, adding what will happen if everybody starts protesting. The case will resume on February 17th. India has been facing nationwide protests against the law for 3 months, in which 27 people were killed. The all-women sit-in against the controversial citizenship law has continued since December 14th last year, despite attacks. The Taliban say they have discussed the Afghan peace process with Qatar's Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani. The group spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the Taliban delegation is headed by Mullah Baradar Akhund and includes Mullah Muhammad Fadl and Maulavi Amir Khan. The spokesperson said the delegation also met US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad. He said important issues regarding the outcome of the negotiations and future agenda were discussed during the meeting. Taliban and the US are currently holding a fresh round of talks to end the Afghan war and devise a plan for withdrawal of American forces. In China, the deadly new coronavirus has killed 98 more people in the past 24 hours. The death toll has risen to 909, while the number of people infected also went up a record 3,062. China's National Health Commission says over 40,000 people are now infected with the disease. This report has more.
The new coronavirus has broken all previous records of deaths and the number of infections. But Beijing claims the number of newly infected people has somewhat stabilized. China's health officials say the hysteria has been overhyped as more than 3,000 patients have been cured and discharged.
Some of them have entered a stable phase with all indicators returning to normal and with a good mental state. Some patients are recovering quickly after meticulous treatment and isolation, and some are already expecting to be discharged.
The French authorities have closed 2 schools for this week as 5 new coronavirus patients were identified and hospitalized. They have also set up a permanent crisis committee after the number of cases rose in France.
La première mesure, c'est
Crisis cells are going to be permanently set up, first of all in the town halls with the crisis center in the town halls of contaminates, which is going to be set up as of this evening with the possibility of having answers to the questions that people will ask.
The World Health Organization has sent a team of experts to Beijing to help investigate and possibly find a cure for the new virus.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has visited patients affected by the deadly coronavirus at a hospital in Beijing. The state media said President Xi observed the treatment of patients and speak via radio linked to doctors in Wuhan. He called for decisive measures to curb the epidemic. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry says 27 foreigners in the country are confirmed to be carrying the novel coronavirus. 2 of the foreign nationals, an American and a Japanese national, have died. Confirmed cases of infection have also been found in 26 other countries, including Japan, Thailand, France, the UAE, and South Korea. In a related development, aircrew at Bangladesh national carrier Biman have refused to work on a flight meant to repatriate citizens from virus-hit Chinese cities. The move has forced the government to scrap its evacuation plan. Last week, Bangladesh removed 312 people and planned a second flight for another 171 nationals. The Interior Ministry says no crew member wants to go to China, and those who went earlier do not wish to return. It says the government is trying to charter a Chinese flight instead. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. The African Union has vowed to boost efforts to end the crisis in Libya and support a faltering UN-led peace process. Speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the African Union summit in Ethiopia, head of AU's Peace and Security Council, Sumail Chergui, said the two organizations should work together for lasting peace in Libya. Libya has been torn by fighting between rival factions since a 2011 NATO-backed uprising killed longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi. But the AU leadership has complained at being ignored in peacemaking efforts, which have been led by the UN and European nations. Chergui said the AU could support peace if a ceasefire deal is signed. He said the African Union wants to be part of an observer mission to ensure the deal is kept. Egypt's army has killed 10 terrorists in northern Sinai province. In a statement, the armed forces claimed they prevented a militant assault on a security post in the province. The statement said an SUV used by the terrorists was destroyed. The army says an operation to find the remaining gunmen is underway. Egypt has been fighting an insurgency which has killed hundreds since the removal of President Mohamed Morsi in July 2013. The army says most attacks were claimed by a Sinai-based group loyal to ISIS. Seven armed separatists have been killed during an attempted arson attack on a polling station in southwestern Cameroon. The country's military says separatists attacked the town of Bangam during legislative and municipal elections. Other clashes broke out in Moyuka, a rebel stronghold in the northwest. Witnesses say there was also a shooting incident in the town of Bo in the southwest. Officials say voter turnout was low despite security arrangements and a heavy military presence. These are the first elections in 7 years after being postponed twice. In a thaw in Russia-Ukraine relations, Moscow says it is ready to exchange ambassadors with Kiev. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the two countries remain closely tied together despite current tensions. Lavrov said the Kremlin does not mind if Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky decides to return the ambassadors. Lavrov said diplomatic relations between the two states soared because of Ukraine. Ukraine recalled then Ambassador Volodymyr Yelchenko from Moscow in March 2014 over the Crimean crisis. Russia responded by withdrawing its ambassador from Kiev in 2016. International observers say Azerbaijan's snap polls were marred by significant violations after the ruling party swept to victory. President Ilham Aliyev has been in office for the past 17 years. Observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and the Council of Europe noted the violations in a joint report. They say restrictive legislation and the political environment prevented genuine competition in Sunday's vote. President Aliyev's party won a majority in elections, but the opposition has rejected the results. The opposition has accused the ruling party of widespread ballot stuffing and voter fraud. As controversy grows around President Donald Trump's immigration policy, U.S. Border Patrol agents find themselves accused of human rights violations. But immigration authorities say such allegations reflect a lack of awareness about the ground realities of policing the U.S.-Mexico border. More in this report.
Allegations of rights abuses against U.S. border guards stem from Washington's now halted policy of separating migrant children from their parents, as well as dire conditions at some Border Patrol stations that were turned into makeshift detention centers. But the guards say they aren't just enforcing the law, they're also saving lives.
To make many rescues out here to help those individuals who are trying to make their cross illegally into the border, but nonetheless, we're here to help them and save a life.
Traffickers charge between $5,000 and $10,000 to bring one person across the border. Once these criminal groups have been paid for their services, they show little regard for their human cargo. As such, a typical day on patrol can turn into a rescue situation.
Yes, sir.
Since there's no dirt, we have to look for kicked over rocks, we have to look for broken brush and things of that nature that give us a sign that someone has been through this area.
Pressure from Washington has forced Mexico to implement tougher checks on its own side of the border. The measure has taken some of the pressure off of the U.S. patrol agents. But with nowhere to go, migrants from violence-hit Central American countries will keep making this treacherous journey, hoping for a better life.
In Greece, the government is speeding up the construction of migrant detention centers on its peripheral islands in the Aegean Sea. This comes after migrants rioted against overcrowding in existing camps last week. Officials say they are proceeding with the acquisition of land for the holding centers on the islands of Lesbos, Chios, and Samos. They say they are already pressing ahead with plans to build holding cells on state-owned land on the islands of Kos and Leros. There are thousands of migrants on these islands waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. A government spokesperson said existing centers will be shut down once the new facilities are operational. Hundreds of thousands of migrants crossed into Europe from Turkey via Greece in 2015 and 2016 until an EU broker deal limited the flow. China has asked the French government not to discriminate against Huawei as it selects suppliers for its 5G mobile network. China's Paris embassy says it fears Huawei will face more constraints than its competitors. In a statement, the embassy called for transparent criteria if Paris wants to impose limits on operators over security fears. It said Beijing does not want to hamper the development of EU companies in China. In Britain, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the UK takes US concerns about Huawei seriously, calling it a high-risk vendor. The UK granted Huawei a limited role in its 5G mobile network last month. Europe's solar orbiter probe has blasted off on its mission to study the sun from close quarters. The €1.3 billion mission is packed with cameras and sensors to reveal new insights into the workings of our star. Researchers hope the knowledge gathered by solar orbiter will improve models used to forecast the worst solar flare outbursts. Scientists say they want to better understand what drives the sun's dynamic behavior. Our star occasionally ejects billions of tons of matter that strike the Earth's magnetic field and could disrupt activity on Earth. The worst of these solar flares can damage satellite electronics, interfere with radio communications, and even knock out power grids. South African anti-apartheid revolutionary leader and late President Nelson Mandela has led a journey from being a prisoner to an elder statesman. South Africa's first black head of the state was released from the prison today, 30 years ago, after spending nearly 3 decades behind the bars. More in this report.
And the crowd getting excited.
Branded a terrorist by his enemies, Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964, isolated from millions of his countrymen as they suffered oppression. While Mandela and his comrades languished in prison and thousands died resenting the regime, more young people flocked to his party's ranks. In 1998, nearly 400 million people watched a tribute concert to mark Mandela's 70th birthday. Amid global pressure, Mandela was released in 1990. The event was watched live by television viewers across the world.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February, at about 3 p.m.
2 days after his release from jail, Mandela returned to his home city to attend the biggest political rally in the country's history.
I have fought against white domination. And I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony.
Mandela remained a global advocate for peace and social justice and took on the role of elder statesman until his death in December 2013.
In the UK, it has been estimated that most food produced globally ends up in the bin. The waste is causing economic as well as environmental loss. To combat the problem, UK authorities have launched a series of apps that allow users to share their surplus food, otherwise destined to be wasted. More in this report.
In just a couple of clicks, Jack has ordered his lunch, but he's also helped to rescue food that would otherwise end up in the rubbish bin. Jack is buying through an app called Karma, which connects users with restaurants and cafes selling their surplus food at discount prices.
Anything I can do to help the environment and also look after the budget as well is beneficial. So yeah, it's a win-win.
Around 2,000 UK outlets are selling their leftover meals through the Swedish startup. The app allows participating businesses to make some money on food that would otherwise be thrown away. According to resource efficiency charity WRAP, food waste costs the British restaurant sector £682 million each year. So why not just make less?
So we don't plan for the day to end up with zero waste, because at the end of every day we do want to have some stock on our shelves. Otherwise a customer could walk in and see an empty store.
But 70% of food waste comes from the home, with the average British family throwing out £800 worth of edible produce every year.
Roughly 10% of all of our annual greenhouse gas emissions come from food waste alone, which I like to point out to people is 4 to 5 times greater than the carbon emissions that come from the global aviation industry.
In 2018, the UK still ranked in the top 10 high-income countries with the greatest levels of food loss. And with 10 billion meals a year still ending up in the bin, the UK has yet to fully close the door on the food waste problem.
Enjoy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Anytime. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Bye.
In Italy, partygoers have come out in style for the annual Venice Carnival, months after the city was hit by its worst floods since 1966. The festival opened with a variety of boats and floats swimming in the city's canals, attracting tourists from around the globe. Watch more about the celebrations in this report.
Hundreds of revelers in Venice lined up the narrow alleys to admire a flotilla of boats carrying spectacularly dressed participants. Some dressed like animals and prisoners, while others camouflaged as cartoon characters. The annual Venice Carnival is popular for its elaborate masks and costumes.
I really like the Venice Carnival. I come here every year with a different mask. I always have a lot of fun. There is a nice and fun atmosphere, full of masks, beautiful costumes. I like it a lot, I never miss it.
The festival is said to date back to the 11th century. It marks a period of opulence before the beginning of Lent, the season when Christians begin 40 days of fasting in the run-up to Easter.
It's the first time that I take part in the Venice Carnival. It is a beautiful experience.
It is always a great experience. It is a meeting of peoples and makes us forget about everyday life. This is the best thing.
This year's carnival will end on February 25th.
We're taking a short break. Stay with us. Google has taken the EU Commission to Europe's second highest court to appeal against a $2.64 billion antitrust fine. The General Court based in Luxembourg will hear arguments from Google. The EU Commission will be supported by Germany and 8 other companies. In 2017, the EU Antitrust Commission accused Google of monopolistic business practices and imposed a massive fine. It was the biggest levy against a single company in an EU antitrust case. Google says it disagreed with the charges and subsequently took its case to the General Court. Moving on, let's look at the stocks. Stock markets in the US have fallen as investors assess the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak in China. 2 major Wall Street indices are trading fractionally lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average falls for a second day, trading marginally lower. The S&P 500 index is also trading fractionally lower, whereas the Nasdaq Composite Index is trading marginally higher. Stock markets across Europe also traded lower with ongoing concerns about the coronavirus outbreak. Let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.